Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Hilltop podcast. Today we have a very special guest here, Dr. Stephanie Kralemann, longtime associate principal here at Chaminade. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about her time here at Chaminade and her life in general. So Stephanie, Dr. K, as you're affectionately known, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's a delight and it's a joy for me to be here, Rob. Thank you.
So here we are in 2024, in case we have any listeners in the future. But this is officially this year going to mark your sort of official retirement. Is that correct? Coming up in literally a few weeks or less than that, right?
That is correct. You know, completing actually 53 years in Catholic education, and 32 of them were on this campus. So it's pretty remarkable.
Wow, wonderful. Well, we got a lot to cover then, I guess, right? We got a lot to get into. So let's start there before we sort of go way back to the beginnings of Stephanie's life. Where are some of those stops? You said the majority of your time here, 32 years at Chaminade. What were some of those other stops before that?
Well, I grew up in South City, St. Louis. My father's name was Joseph. My mother's name was Helen. My older sister Pam and I are 11 months apart, so I guess that makes us Irish twins.
Irish twins, right?
And then I have a brother, Joseph, named after my dad. And then there's one other girl, my youngest sister, Michelle. So the four of us grew up in a household that was very Catholic and very Croatian, because both my mother and my father's parents had immigrated from Croatia in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And because of their siblings, there was a huge Catholic Croatian family of aunts and uncles and cousins. And even though we lived in the boundaries of St. Francis de Sales Parish, some of you might be familiar with that, because we were second and third generation Croatian, we were given permission at that time by the Archbishop to attend St. Joseph Catholic School in the Soulard area. And so that's where my roots were, at St. Joe Croatian, having attended there with, again, my brother, two sisters, and my parents went there when they were kids, and all my cousins. K through 8, I was there, graduated in '63, and then naturally my older sister and I, because we were only 11 months apart, we graduated together in 8th grade and attended St. Francis de Sales High School. Graduated in '67, and then I moved on to Fontbonne College. And at that time, Fontbonne was not a university. It was an all-female college run by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. And there I earned my bachelor's degree in English literature. And then actually started my career in Catholic education the very year that I graduated in 1971. I took a position at St. Joseph Croatian Catholic Elementary School.
Back at home.
Yes, and stayed there for 12 years. I had the good fortune that in being there for 12 years, I taught every single grade level from kindergarten all the way up to 8th grade, not knowing that God's divine plan for me was going to move out of the classroom and become an elementary school principal, which I really did not have the desire to do so, only because I loved the classroom so much. But in 1983, St. Joseph Croatian School, the enrollment began to dwindle, and they eventually closed the school. The Catholic Education Office on Lindell placed me in a leadership program, and then I took the position as elementary principal at St. Bernadette Catholic School in South St. Louis County, right next to Jefferson Barracks Park, which also butted up against the beautiful Jefferson Barracks Cemetery. It was a beautiful area. I remained there for 9 years as elementary principal, and I did not realize it at that time, but because of her namesake, St. Bernadette, my devotion to the Blessed Mother just started to increase, even though it was my mother and my grandmothers who instilled a real love and deep devotion to Mary. But being principal at Bernadette, it just seemed to blossom more and more, because everyone knows the story about Bernadette and Our Lady in Lourdes. Then in 1992, a colleague here at Chaminade, his children were actually at St. Bernadette School, and he approached me one day and said, I know you are completing your doctorate degree. What are your next professional goals? And at that time, I really didn't have any. And he said, why don't you come to Chaminade and interview for a position for the administrative team. And I'll never forget, Rob, my first reaction was to him, are you crazy? There's no way I'm going to an all-boys school.
Right.
Because after all, 12 years from kindergarten through 8th grade, 9 years as an elementary principal, my first 21 years in Catholic education was all with elementary children. Although the middle grades were in there at Bernadette. But needless to say, I really began to pray earnestly to our Blessed Mother with St. Bernadette, what is the next step to my career and vocation in Catholic education? And the very day that I interviewed for the position here at Chaminade as associate principal for academics and curriculum happened to be February the 18th, which at that time was the feast day of St. Bernadette. So my prayer to Bernadette was, you really are going to have to show me how to discern as best as I can. Is this really the next step for me? Because most of the things that I've said I would never ever do, that's exactly what the dear Lord has called me to. So I interviewed on the 18th, and Father Ralph happened to be absent at that day, God rest his soul. But he called me on the 19th and asked me to come out for an additional interview. And by the time I left Chaminade that day and drove back to St. Bernadette, the telephone came in. And they asked if I would accept the position. I mean, it was just that profound and really very miraculous. So that's how the journey of those first 53 years continued. And then when I got to the end of my full-time career here at Chaminade in 2019, Father Ralph and Mr. Rohn asked me to stay on to do something part-time, and that's how I transitioned from full-time work into part-time work and became the PACE program coordinator. And certainly during that time, I had attended St. Louis University in order to earn 3 different graduate degrees, a master's in curriculum and instruction, an educational specialist degree. And then right before I came to Chaminade in 1992, St. Louis University conferred the Doctor of Education degree. So I just jumped in.
Well, that's a wonderful sort of setup you've given us. So thank you for that detail. I want to dig into a little bit before we get into sort of the bulk of your time here at Chaminade. I want to ask some follow-up. So you mentioned your family very Croatian, obviously. So how do you think that kind of shaped your early childhood? How did that heritage, what did their Croatian heritage bring to Stephanie Kralemann?
Absolutely. It's funny that you should ask me that. I was thinking the other day while I was here at Chaminade, I had been given the name the Velvet Hammer. And I was thinking the other day, in terms of my Catholic upbringing and my Croatian upbringing, both my mother and father were very much velvet hammers. My mother and father were certainly my first teachers. They were loyal and true disciples of Jesus Christ. They were holy, apostolic, sacramental people who placed their Catholic faith at the center of our lives, the 4 of us children. It was a beautiful family. It was truly a family that modeled what you would want the Holy Family to bring into your home. That the holiness of Nazareth and their home and how they lived and how they professed their faith on a daily basis and how they proclaimed the gospel in relationships. Our home became a holy home in many ways. We did everything together, even though periodically my father had to travel out of town. As soon as he got back into town, there were picnics and there were outings and there were travel time together with the family. And if you know anything about the Croatian people, the ethnicity is that they are very hard-working people. They tend to be very assertive. They tend to be sometimes even aggressive. But there's a beautiful balance of harmony, what I refer to as both the feminine and the masculine that come together.
Sure.
So I know that growing up Catholic Croatian and being a part of this larger Croatian parish community, it definitely put my feet on the right path in terms of how to grow, how to cultivate my faith, and to cherish and treasure it, no matter what vocation the dear
Wonderful.
Lord was going to call me to.
Well, speaking of vocation, that was going to be my next question is if you can take yourself back to teenage or young adult Stephanie, where did your vocation to teaching, to the classroom, to working with young people come from? Were you shaped by teachers yourself that you had growing up, or was your family involved in education in general, or how did you end up in the classroom?
Yeah, my father was a carpenter, and with his name being Joseph, I always took great delight in that.
Perfect, exactly.
My mother, I guess you would call her now a domestic engineer. She worked, from home. But by the time my sister and I were in 7th and 8th grade, then she started to actually take a full-time job at JCPenney's, of all places, on Cherokee Street, which is in South St. Louis. But once again, growing up in the formation of faith that was so rich and robust, at the age of 5, I remember distinctly being in the kitchen of our home and, for a lack of a better word, just having an extremely powerful mystical experience with the Holy Spirit. I compare it to just a deep infusion and a penetration and saturation that would artistically, Rob, resemble something like a burning bush.
Wow.
And at the age of 5, of course, I was speechless. I did not exactly know what was happening, but the fire and the warmth and just the color of it all just infused me. And after it left me, I just kind of thought, wow, that's pretty special. That's pretty unique. After the age of 5, the next experience I had was when I was 12 years of age. I was in 7th grade, and I can distinctly remember sitting in the 7th grade classroom, and up on the wall was the crucifix. And Sister Mary DeLords was teaching us, and I remember sitting there in my navy blue uniform and my white blouse and my navy blue sweater, and all of a sudden I looked up at the cross, and just as I'm sitting in front of you, Jesus spoke to me from the cross, and he said to me, when you grow up, you are going to be a Catholic school teacher.
Wow.
Well, I came home, and that night, having dinner with the family, back then we called it supper.
Sure.
I was helping my mom wash and dry the dishes, and all of a sudden she said to me, how was your day today? And I go, oh, I have great news to tell you. I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a Catholic school teacher. And she didn't say anything to me. But I could see that all of a sudden there were tears coming down her face. And I looked up at her as I was drying dishes, and I said, "Why are you crying, Mom?" And she said, "Oh, Stephanie, that's never going to happen." And I go, "Why?" And she said, "Because you're so quiet and you're so timid and so bashful. In order to teach, you have to talk." And I said to her very proudly and very courageously with this great assurance, "Oh no, today Jesus spoke to me from the cross and he told me when I grow up, I am going to be a Catholic school teacher." So that was the second experience. And then after I left Francis de Sales, I went to Fontbonne, and that's where I earned my teaching certificate. And at that time, Fontbonne was actually noted for being in the top 3 schools in the country with teacher education programs. So I felt like I just got a pristine background.
Wonderful.
Then after that, there were some other mystical experiences that I had that just continued and continued to enrich my life.
You're giving me goosebumps here, Dr. K, and these stories.
Well, the other thing, Rob, this is interesting, as I was driving out today, May 13th is today, and it's the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima, which once again is not a coincidence for me. Most of the very mystical, powerful, magical experiences that I've had in both my vocational and professional life have occurred on a Marian feast day. So it actually started with Jesus directly speaking to me.
Amazing.
And that's been
here you
pretty,
are, 52 years later.
53 years later.
53, excuse me, yes. Don't want to short you in 1 year,
right.
Excuse me.
So that's how it actually started.
So let's talk a little bit going back to St. Joseph, right? St. Joseph Croatian. So how was it like to now be back there on the other side as a staff member, as a teacher, versus having not too long before, 8 years or so before, been a student there? Was there teachers that were still there from when you were there that you worked with now, that you were peers? How was that?
At St. Joe Croatian?
Yeah.
Well, and when I left in 1983, that is when the Archdiocese decided to close the school.
I'm saying from when you went back to now as a teacher there, isn't that where you went to elementary school, you were saying?
Yes.
Yes, right. So was there teachers there? How was it like to now be back there as a teacher, having been there as a student? Had things changed? Talk to me a little bit about that change.
When I was attending there, they were all sisters of the Adorers of the Most Precious Blood. But the interesting thing about it was that they were all Croatian themselves. Now, they taught all of us in English. They taught my mother and father in English, but they also taught our parents the Croatian language. So my mother and father were fluent in Croatian. By the time I arrived on the scene, that was like around 1959 through 63, or probably even earlier than that, 1954. The Holy Sisters, the Precious Blood Nuns, they were all pretty much in full habit. And then when I graduated and decided to teach there, I was maybe just the second or third lay teacher that they hired. But I had the good fortune of working alongside the Precious Blood Sisters. And my mother's oldest sister was actually in their community, and we kept hoping maybe Aunt Sister Miriam would show up at St. Joe Croatian, and Stephanie and Aunt Sister Miriam would teach together. However, back then, in the 70s, the Reverend Mother and the religious community would never allow her to come home to her own, city and state. So I missed out on that, but, still had that beautiful Precious Blood charisma, that was attached to my life and working with them. And then as I stayed 12 years at St. Joe Croatian, I think we hired maybe 2 or 3 other lay women. And so it started to become more lay teachers than Precious Blood Sisters. But then, as I said, as the neighborhood enrollment began to dwindle, it was no longer an enrollment that reflected predominantly Croatian, second, third generation. the diocese closed the school.
So now talk to me one other thing about St. Joseph. How was it like to teach from kindergarten through 8th grade, and what do you learn? That seems like that blows my mind. I can't even imagine one year being in kindergarten, the next year being in and teaching that whole spectrum. Imagine that provided a lot of education for yourself, right?
It was awesome, and that's what helped me really when I became an elementary principal, because I knew exactly when I was the principal of Bernadette what it was like to teach K through 1 and 2, what it was like to have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and then have the middle grades. But when I was at St. Joseph, as you could tell, I absolutely loved it. I loved those children. So much so, I'll never forget when I stepped foot on Chaminade's campus in 1992, and I looked out at the atrium with all of these big students. They actually were so intimidating, I thought, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. But at St. Joe Croatian, they had a very unique grade configuration. So kindergarten was by itself, but students in 1st and 2nd grade were together. 3rd and 4th grade were together, 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th grade. So I had the unique training as a teacher to be able to teach 12 years of double grades.
Sensor went off. Scott's going to give us some light again.
This happens like during the middle of parent-teacher conference.
Okay.
We're sitting too still here. So if you're not watching, if you're listening to us, the lights just went out in the room because of the sensors in the room.
Okay.
We didn't do anything. Keep going.
Right. So because of that experience, that certainly, again, helped lay the path to what was coming next. But while I was there at St. Joseph, St. Louis University, Fontbonne, Harris Stowe, there were several universities and colleges that kept sending me student teachers. And the student teachers then would gradually, be weaned into coming into front of the classroom, and taking over my position, which was great. But yes, I would certainly say because of those 12 years and the unique structure of the educational configuration to St. Joe Croatian, it was so perfect for me to slide right into the principalship for 9 years.
Great. So let's pick back up now here at 1992. You're just newly hired here at Chaminade. You kind of alluded to it a little bit in your last answer of sort of being intimidated by the larger students, the physically older students. But what was your nervousness? What was your excitement? What was your feelings about this sort of new adventure in a different, in the middle high school years?
I think I felt very much like some of the young men who first come to Chaminade. You see Chaminade Hall at the top of Lindbergh Boulevard, and you think to myself, oh my gosh, look at that very prestigious school that you hear about. My first couple of weeks in my full-time position as associate principal, and incidentally, I was, in the history of the school, the very first female that was hired for the Principal's Council. And I was struggling for a while. It had nothing to do with the people that I was working with, and it had nothing to do with saying yes to the Marianist apostolate. Because in my heart, Rob, I knew that when I said yes to Father Ralph, that I would accept this position, I knew it was going to continue to be an invitation to do more holy, sacramentalized work. As a human being, it was just trying to get my foothold to the point that as I was driving home, every once in a while I would break into tears and just say to the dear Lord, why did you call me to this experience? I don't think I can do it. I can't get my footing. I cannot get the landscape below me to stop shaking. Well, again, in a very mystical way, I go home, and in my room where I have my bookshelves, I've always been a big fan of Henry Nouwen. Many people are familiar with Father Nouwen. He's a great spiritual writer. and I have many books on the bookshelf, and I just so happened, by the grace of God, pulled out one of his books, and I cannot remember if it was called The Wounded Healer or Creative Ministry, but the pages that fell out for me basically said this, that when God is doing something new in your life, you're going to feel like you are on an earthquake tremor. The ground below you is shaking. You can't get your footing. But not to be afraid, and do not be alarmed, because God is doing something new in your life. He's creating something wonderfully new. And just be open to the experience. And then he concluded with something like, after all, it was out of an earthquake that the resurrection took place. So I closed that book, and it was kind of like being that 5-year-old little girl again in that kitchen, and just feeling like that burning bush and that warmth and that love and that excitement and that passion, and okay, I can do this. So that was the initial experience, though. There was fear, there was trepidation coming in.
Sure. Well, good. That's, again, another amazing story. So thank you for sharing. So let's talk a little bit of sort of logistics, not that we can cover every detail, but what were the academics like in 1992 at Chaminade in terms of, again, I don't expect you to list every class or anything like that, but what would you say things were like at that? What was sort of the status quo? And then what was your sort of mission to sort of move that forward?
Right. When I arrived, we were grades 7 through 12. And that first year, it took me a while to really insert myself into reviewing the entire curriculum, the vertical sequence, just the comprehensive content of the curriculum. And knowing that it was a college prep school, that certainly caught my attention, and I saw that we had, back in 1992, maybe 3 or 4 AP courses. And I had to get myself acquainted with what AP College Board was like. And then at the same time, we had a couple of ACC courses. And I thought, what the heck is ACC? And needed to get myself acquainted again with advanced college dual credit courses. But my hope was, certainly in sitting down with Father Ralph, I wanted to get his perspective and his vision on how he wanted to see Chaminade grow and move in the future. So knowing that we really did want to become a powerhouse, a very prestigious school in terms of academic excellence, working with the other 3 principals, working with academic council, all the heads of the academic department, I knew that we were going to forge ahead and really build together just a quality academic program. So that what we have today, I always say, I was just the point person, but like anything, you've got to move forward, keep that vision going. If there's a couple of setbacks and 1 step backwards, you just continue to keep forging ahead. And it was challenging, but knowing what we have today in terms of, I think it's 28 AP courses, and we certainly can claim that we have over 100 semester courses that yield some type of advanced college credit for our young men. That just goes to show you that whatever you entrust to our Blessed Mother, she takes care of, because the bottom line is she never fails. So I had to continually say to myself, this is not about your ego. And I remember Mother Teresa always saying, if you live with your ego, then you edge God out, E-G-O. So Stephanie, do not live with your ego. Don't live with your 3 graduate degrees and all your past experience. You're going to live in the Immaculate Heart of Mary. That's where your ministry is going to reside, and that's where you're going to be able to have the Blessed Mother work with you in terms of how to make this a rich, robust receptacle of grace. And that's how it all happened.
Wonderful. So not that we're going to sort of end here, but what are some of those accomplishments that you're most proud of? You kind of alluded to some of the growth of the ACC, AP programs, and again, as you say, certainly not about you or your ego, but
Right.
what are you most proud of that the school has accomplished that you were a part of over the 32 years that you were here?
Well, certainly I love the fact that we still embrace and love so deeply our young men. I'll never forget when I was a young teacher in my 20s. Once again, my mother, she used to always say to me, "You're so passionate about everything that you're doing, and I know that you're rigid at times and strict in the classroom and a great disciplinarian," and there's that velvet hammer, right?
Sure, amen.
But she would always say to me, do the children know that you love them? Well, the first time she said that to me, it was like, wow, it kind of threw me back. But it made me think. Fast forward, I know the administration, the faculty, the staff, everyone who is daily involved in the lives of our young men. We truly love them. We embrace them. Your son went here. Mr. Bell's son went here. I know he's in the room. My two nephews were here. And now that they're, in their 40s and married with children, they'll still say to me, "Aunt Steph, going to Chaminade was the best years of our lives," and because we knew that we were loved. What a great testament to the school.
Right.
And certainly beyond that, I relish the fact that as a female, I was so embraced for my gifts and talents and creative abilities. And that empowered me to be the best educator I could possibly be. The academic program, I'm certainly so proud to see where we are today. Knowing that we have waiting lists trying to get into school, that's very gratifying and edifying. When Father Ralph had this vision about the PACE program, and he wanted our young men to graduate with 1 or 2 years of college finished here, I got behind that. I was so glad many years ago when my mother, again, God rest her soul, she said to me, "I won't be alive, Stephanie, when you retire. But I want to just tell you this, do not just quit your work and walk away. I think it's going to be very difficult for you because you're so passionate and so in love with Catholic education. Think about transitioning from full-time work," pardon me, I'm getting emotional.
No, you're great.
To part-time work. Well, I always say to myself, I think my mother must have talked to Father Ralph or whispered in his ear, because when Father Ralph said to me, "We really don't want you to leave. Can you please think about part-time work?" I thought, thank you. I thought, I can do that. I can do that. So just staying around the past 5 years, my life, around Chaminade has become less active, but it's become more contemplative, and I can stand at a distance and just watch and pray and observe and take great joy and delight in seeing just all the beauty. I've often said that the gentleness and the tenderness of Chaminade's campus is because she walks amongst us. She walks every day on this beautiful campus, and how blessed I've been for 32 years to have walked with her, and for all of us to have walked with her and journeyed with her.
Yeah, let me follow up with that. I love that phrase, "she walks with us." So I think you have a unique perspective here too, having such a devotion to Mary yourself, being the first female in the administrative role. Here we have a school that, an all-boys school that is, though, in the Marianist tradition, is devoted to Mary in that way. So how does that inform the school? How does that inform our young men of having a school that is devoted, though, to Mary, even though it's an all-boys school? So can you sort of touch on that and reflect on that a little bit?
Well, in the past, with my own, again, professional and personal vocation, I had taken a couple of classes in mysticism. And I was always struck by how it was said that the great mystics had some type of feminine and masculine complementarity within them, that they were able to identify the fullness of being both masculine and feminine. And so when I got to Chaminade and I thought, Estovir, be a man, and here I am, a woman, you know, how am I going to connect to that? How am I going to see that connection? How am I going to be able to witness to that and proclaim and speak to that? And then it was kind of like Mary saying to me, settle down, you know, here you are, a woman made in the image and likeness of Christ. You've already identified that you've had this phenomenal Catholic upbringing with two parents who were able to form and shape and mold you into the woman that you are today because of the beautiful example of my father's masculinity and my mother's femininity, and that's all a part of who I am. And I remember just thinking to myself, Estovir, whenever I would address the student body, you know, I always had a habit of saying, gentlemen. And it just became more and more apparent to me that yes, knowing that they are Chaminade gentlemen, and again, we are in a Marianist apostolate, and listening to Father Ralph and Father Oscar and Brother Jim, Brother Tim, who was here, Father True, what was his name? He taught Latin, can't remember. Father Dan. They talked about the Sons of Mary. I said, oh my gosh, in my own mind I thought, Chaminade gentlemen, Sons of Mary. Chaminade gentlemen, Sons of Mary. If that is not the most perfect image of the masculine and the feminine coming together. But I had to go deeper, and I had to say to myself, every young man that comes to this school, they are invited into the Immaculate Heart of our Blessed Mother, the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And if they're invited into that Immaculate Heart, and if all the adults, faculty, staff, administrators, if we all witness and live too in her Immaculate Heart, then within these young men, Estovir is going to shape itself as both Chaminade gentlemen and Sons of Mary, masculine, feminine.
That's a wonderful way to put it. So you've mentioned Father Ralph a number of times, and certainly played a big role in the school, a big role in your life. Oh, our lights are going out on us again. Talk a little bit about, and he started Chaminade not long before you started, right? He hired you, but you know he hadn't been here that long at that point.
Yeah.
So what was interesting about his vision for where Chaminade, he wanted to move Chaminade, and what was it like to work for him and work under his and with his vision that he had?
Yes. Father, again, very much like the Estovir motto, was a gentleman and a son of Mary. I love the fact, being a woman who had such great devotion to Mary, that he too spoke of Mary in a very tender way, in a very gentle way. So the fellowship and the friendship that I had with Father Ralph was therefore deeper than just professional colleagues. Mm-hmm. He obviously was a very learned man, competent, knowledgeable, intelligent, and his vision was always about bringing God into the experience for these young men, having them grow into the fullest that they could. And I think because of his own background and his own experience in St. Mary's High School and being formed and shaped by the Marianist brothers, that certainly was early formation for him, but that grounded him in, I think, in his own vocation, not only to choose the Marianists, but then to see what could be done on this campus with the help of Mary. Whether it was laptop technology, the house system, experiential education, global education, as I mentioned before, the curriculum, the formation of faculty, campus ministry was so important. I'll never forget when I first got here in 1992, one of the very first conversations I had with him, because you asked me earlier about the curriculum when I walked in 1992. I was interested in our, at that time, I think it was called the religion department. And I thought, why isn't it called religious studies, or why isn't it called theology? And this is not, in any way an insult to those men and women who taught religion back in 1990-ish. But most of them were not theologians. They did not have a background in religion or theology. And I said to Father Ralph, that would be one of the first things that I would like to amend and change. Everyone that we hire for the theology department, they need to have a master's or a doctorate degree in theology. Well, he agreed to all that. So all the different types of visions that I had for myself, being the academic person, I could see that they complemented Father Ralph's vision. And from that, we were able to, again, bring more balance to what the Marianist apostolate is all about, but also at the same time to elevate. And you probably remember at one time, and we still do this today, Chaminade, St. Mary's, and Vianney, we get together and we talk about the Marianist Day, and we come together and we share the foundational charism. One of the very first that we did here on Chaminade's campus, and one of the Marianist priests, Father Joe Tedesco, I believe I'm saying that right, he gave a beautiful metaphorical image that the Marianist apostolate was about a womb, and more specifically about the womb of Mary, where she carried Jesus, and that every Catholic Marianist school would do well to image that metaphorical image, that within our womb, that we would continue to allow God's good graces to plant seeds, to plant richness, and let things begin to grow and cultivate and bloom and give birth to. Well, I think that's what it was like for me working with Father Ralph. It was about the womb experience in the most sacred sense, and just seeing all the beautiful things he touched, not only with his mind and his heart, his spirit and his soul, but his deep belief in the Marianist apostolate and how that began to cultivate over the years.
That's beautiful. Besides Father Ralph, who are some of the other major personalities or legends of Chaminade that really kind of stood out to you over your time here that made a difference, whether it be in the classroom, whether it be just interacting with the young men, whether it be on the athletic fields? Who are some of those men or women that you want to sort of call out in a positive way?
Wow. It's an interesting question. Certainly I mentioned Father Ralph, Dr. Lou Peters, who was always a mentor for me, even before I came to Chaminade, and he was working with the Archdiocese. Lou was a very faith-filled, holy man. I know he had a tremendous impact on people here at Chaminade with his faith and his emphasis on evangelization. The other men that I worked with on the Principals Council, whether that be Jim Gerker or Tom Fiala, Mike Loyette, Brother Rich Villa, Phil Rohn, Pete Vlahooten, Todd Guidry, today. What a blessing that is to see how God has exalted his life as now the president of our school. All of those just outstanding men who, again, embraced who I was and my gifts. They were highly intelligent, highly competent, extremely humorous and full of wit and comical, which I really appreciated because sometimes I would become so intense with my work, and I really needed all of that. Mr. Zolnowski, of course, had great love for Mr. Z. Always admired, his window dressing of all of the windows around Chaminade. I guess so many other people to think about and not to any way forget them. But I would just say the administrators that I worked with, they were awesome. The faculty as heads of their departments, each and every one of the teachers, was so gifted. I loved them all. And I think I had great rapport with each and every one of them. They all had special, and they taught me so much. That was the real gift. I had to remember that the teacher that I became when I was a very young teacher, it was because of the children in that classroom. They formed and shaped me. When I came to Chaminade, the adults that I worked so closely with and the young men, they continue to form and shape me, into who I am today. So, and I say that in a very humble way, and a very grateful way as well.
Sure. Yeah, and on a personal level, I appreciated that love and support when I was working with you more specifically. I always remember the sort of beautiful, whether it be an email or an in-person response to when you came to see one of our plays, and sort of again, I could feel the love and the support from you, and so that was always
wonderful.
so beautiful to see. One thing I want to get to, we got about, I think, 20 minutes left. One thing I want to make sure we get to, if you're willing to share, I know that I haven't actually heard it personally, but I know you have great stories of ghosts on the Chaminade campus. Are you willing to share some experiences, or would you not? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
not at all.
Would you touch on that?
I've often wondered why someone hasn't written a book about some of the narratives that they have shared about ghosts on Chaminade campus. The one that comes to mind right now that was deeply personal for me was, in fact, with my mother. It happened to be on a June day, very sunny, very bright. School was out. My laptop was on the blinks. I was driving, of course, that I'm still driving, my little BMW convertible, and I said to my mom, you want to go with me to Chaminade? I got to drop off my laptop. We put the top down, and we both had our sunglasses on and our little caps, and off we drove. We came to campus, and I turned in my laptop, and I said, it's going to be a while for them to look at it. Let's just walk around our campus. Well, she and I proceeded down Cemetery Lane, and at that time, my mom was probably close to 80 years of age. However, she and I walked a lot every day. We would walk around all different kinds of Forest Park, Francis Park, Wilmore, you name it, Carondelet Park, Tower Grove. And I said, let's do our walk on Chaminade's campus while my laptop is being fixed. So we got down to Cemetery Lane, and as I said, it was a beautiful day. We got on the drawbridge, and I said to her, if you're interested, we can go up these little stone steps to a subdivision that you're probably unfamiliar with that even exists. So we climbed the steps and we looked around, and we turned around and we looked at Chaminade's campus, with all the trees, proceeded back down the steps, got on the drawbridge, and we were standing there on the drawbridge, and she had said something to me like, boy, it's really very chilly. It's kind of cold. Well, I glanced at her and I thought, it's June, the sun is out, and it's not really cold. And she said, what about the wind? Because the wind definitely had picked up. Well, interesting enough, as I tell this story, which is kind of hard to believe, all of a sudden my mom, it was like she was lifted up off the ground and she was transported past me, and going at a pretty rapid speed, and I could see a very large tree right there on the left side of me. And my thought was, if my mom continues to travel in that distance, she's going to hit that tree, it's going to knock her out. And here she is, 4'11", 120 pounds, a tiny little lady. So I began to go after her, and fortunately I was able to touch her arm, and it kind of seemed as if she kind of settled down onto the ground. But she was petrified and she was shaking, and we just stood there, and I said to her, "Are you okay?" Not knowing if she was having a stroke, if she, was just having some kind of a seizure. What the heck is going on? You don't normally see people kind of like levitating off the ground.
I have never.
And moving. So we stood there for a while, and I said, we're on the grass right now. How about if we just very carefully, and I took her and we moved over to the asphalt of Cemetery Lane. And just that quickly, Rob, I said to her, you know what? I said, at one time, there was a cemetery down here. And she looked at me and she said, oh my gosh, whatever was pushing me, it was very hostile. I could feel it against my back, against my shoulders. Something was pushing me, and it was very hostile. And, my mother having an 8th grade education, I never heard or used that kind of word before. So we stood there, and I said, the fact that there was a cemetery here, I said, why don't we just quietly say a prayer for the souls that one time were here? My understanding is that they moved the cemetery down to St. John Vianney. So Mom and I just stood there, and we said a little prayer about the fact that I hope we weren't trespassing on some sacred holy ground. We were not in any way trying to intrude. We were just simply out for a walk. And we prayed, eternal rest grant unto you, O Lord. And then she seemed to be fine. We walked up, I got my laptop, we went home. The following day was a Monday, and the principals were meeting to plan for things for summer. And Mr. Gerker was principal at the time, and he said to me, how was your weekend? And I told him what happened to Mom and me. And he goes, he goes, really? And I go, yes. He goes, you're sure? And I go, honest to God, that was my experience. I'm a big believer that if it's your lived experience, it's a real experience. So I left his office, I went back into my office, and then maybe about 15 minutes later, he came into my office and he said to me, Dr. K, I want to show you something. And I said, okay. He said, I have the greatest love and respect for you. And he said, you know that? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, I took my camera and I went down to Cemetery Lane and I took a couple of photographs. And I came back and I put them up on my laptop, and he said, I want to show you something. So I walked into his office, and he uploaded a photograph. And there was Cemetery Lane, right where Mom and I were standing on that Friday morning. And in a little corner of the photograph, you could see what can best be described and made out a photo of a priest with a collar on. And come to find out, Mr. Z later on had researched, and I can't remember exactly the name of the priest's name, Father McLaren, I apologize, I can't remember. But the point being, there was a little picture of a priest that was there. And Mr. Gerker said, maybe your mom and you experienced something that wasn't meant to be harmful, but maybe it was just some way of, again, and I'm a big believer, in the communion of saints, the mystical body of Christ, where the church militant, church suffering, and the church triumphant, we all intermingle with one another. Those of us who are on earth, those in purgatory, and up in heaven. And so gradually, Dan Karcher, Dr. Karcher, got a hold of the photograph. So sometimes during Halloween week, I would go into different classrooms and I would tell them a more detailed story than I'm telling today about the experience that my mom and I had at Cemetery Lane, the photograph that Mr. Gerker had taken, and The Little Priest, and
Wow.
yeah. So, and then I've heard from other faculty members, what happened on the fourth floor, what happened
Right.
in campus ministry, and
We could do a whole episode on
it
just
certainly
their
could
stories,
be.
probably,
It
or a
certainly
book,
could
as
be.
you said.
That's right. It would be fun to
as
do.
well too.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. Well, that's amazing. So I just want to wrap up. Unfortunately, we've just got a couple minutes. I feel like we could do 5 more hours of this, and it would be fabulous. But for today, at least for our school schedule, we just got a few minutes left. So I always like to wrap up by asking our participant, our interviewee. Here we have our school motto of Estovere. We've alluded to it earlier, be a man. So what does Estovere mean to Dr. Stephanie Kralemann? After experiencing it for 32 years here now, how would you sum it up? How would you take that Latin phrase to be a man? And what does that truly mean for your experience?
Mary invites us into her immaculate heart every single day, every moment of every single day. Accept that invitation. Remain in her immaculate heart, and Estovere will be birthed in your life.
Wonderful. I must say that's one of our shortest responses, but also maybe one of our most profound. So thank you, Dr. Kralemann, and thank you for sort of opening yourself up and getting emotional sometimes. I appreciate that, your honesty and your sort of experience. That's wonderful to share with our listeners and our viewers. So
especially for the Velvet Hammer to show.
Amen.
Yes.
Exactly. And obviously, thank you for your 53 years of Catholic education, and especially your 32 years here at Chaminade, for all you've done for our school community in many, many different ways, and that has been shown over these years. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, Rob. It's just been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Real quickly, what's retirement going to be like? Full-time retirement going to be like? Do you have travel plans? Do you have what's it going to be? Quick response.
The part-time position has led me into more quiet, contemplative life. I do not have anything orchestrated right now in my plans. I'm just going to stay open to the Holy Spirit in my life and see what He calls me to. This is comical, but a couple of people have already asked me, do I want to do something with their work or work part-time? And of course, I'm not ready to say yes to that, but
right.
We'll see. We'll see what the dear Lord has planned. But I'm excited about it. The 5-year-old little girl within me, still knows that the burning bush is still very much alive, and it's lit and it's burning. And I'm excited about the warmth and the comfort and the love that it'll bring.
The Holy Spirit has led you on a great path so far, so I think it will continue to do so. Well,
I think so too, Rob.
Thanks again for your work, and thanks for joining us today. And thank you, viewer and listener, for joining us here on the Hilltop.